Alabama, a state with a complex and often grim history of capital punishment, is poised to make a controversial leap into uncharted territory executions by nitrogen gas. This method, untested on humans, has sparked heated debate, raising questions about its legality, its ethical implications, and its potential to usher in a new unsettling chapter in the American death penalty narrative. In 2018, Alabama became the first state to authorize nitrogen hypoxia as an execution method. This decision, coming amidst growing concerns about the availability and constitutionality of lethal injection drugs, signaled a potential shift in the landscape of capital punishment. Proponents of nitrogen hypoxia argue that it offers a more humane alternative to lethal injection, a method increasingly plagued by botched executions and legal challenges. They claim that death by nitrogen inhalation would be swift and painless, akin to falling asleep due to a lack of oxygen. However, critics, including human rights groups and medical professionals, vehemently disagree. They argue that nitrogen hypoxia is untested and experimental, likening it to conducting human experiments on death row. The lack of scientific data on its effects on humans, they argue, raises serious concerns about the potential for excruciating pain and suffering. The legal battle over nitrogen hypoxia is intricately linked to the ongoing challenges facing lethal injection, the predominant method of execution in the United States. As pharmaceutical companies have increasingly restricted the use of their drugs for executions, states have struggled to obtain the necessary chemicals, leading to delays and legal challenges. Alabama's turn to nitrogen hypoxia is seen by some as a way to circumvent these legal hurdles and ensure the continuation of the death penalty. However, opponents argue that this shift is a desperate attempt to legitimize a practice that is inherently cruel and unusual, violating the Eighth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Ethical concerns. A question of morality and suffering. Beyond the legal arguments, the debate over nitrogen hypoxia raises profound ethical questions about the role of the state in inflicting death and the potential for suffering in the execution process. Critics argue that any method of execution, including nitrogen hypoxia, carries an inherent risk of pain and suffering, and that the state has a moral obligation to minimize harm, even to those convicted of heinous crimes. Proponents of the death penalty counter that certain crimes warrant the ultimate punishment, and that the focus should be on the suffering inflicted on the victims and their families. However, the question of whether the state should engage in practices that could potentially inflict significant pain and suffering, even on convicted criminals, remains a deeply divisive issue. Public perception and expert opinions: a divided nation. Public opinion on nitrogen hypoxia, like the death penalty itself, is deeply divided. While some polls suggest that support for the death penalty remains relatively high in the United States, particularly in southern states like Alabama, there is also a growing awareness of the ethical and logistical challenges associated with capital punishment. Expert opinions on nitrogen hypoxia are equally mixed. While some medical professionals argue that it could theoretically lead to a more peaceful death than lethal injection, others express serious concerns about the lack of scientific data and the potential for unforeseen complications. This lack of consensus further complicates the debate and underscores the uncertainties surrounding this untested method of execution. The uncertain future of nitrogen executions, a legacy of debate. As Alabama moves forward with its plans to implement nitrogen hypoxia, the legal and ethical battles are likely to intensify. Opponents of the death penalty will continue to challenge its constitutionality and morality, while proponents will argue for its necessity and deterrent effect. The future of nitrogen executions remains uncertain. Whether it becomes a widely adopted method of execution or a footnote in the long and controversial history of capital punishment in the United States will depend on the outcome of legal challenges, evolving public opinion, and the willingness of states to grapple with the ethical complexities of taking a human life in the name of justice. One thing is certain: the debate over nitrogen hypoxia will continue to raise profound questions about the nature of punishment, the limits of human experimentation, and the very meaning of justice in a civilized society. So I leave you with this: is nitrogen gas a more humane method of execution, or is it simply a more palatable way to stomach a barbaric practice?